So I think the question is, where does that disclosure go and how do you do it, right? I don't think
No,
it,
no, to me, it's, if I could, it's
yeah,
much more than that, Steve. And I apologize, this is Ellen. It's that, I think Shepherd probably comes from the kind of background I do, where at least historically, you've got companies, I'll give you my large automotive company board, we've got a lot of plants in Europe. We're guided by the CSRD.
Yeah.
The rules are strong. They're actually stronger than anything we're facing in the US. And
Yeah.
oh, by the way, you have to deal with those in order to even be considered under RFPs in Europe. So if you're a large manufacturing company in Europe and you're trying to apply, do an RFP with another company in Europe, you have got to have da 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 da. So you're in conflict. And so I think that's why the question is, it's almost like the US expectation is we won't be required to do these disclosures. But if you live in an international world, it's becoming even more important. So I think the question was more of, is there any, other than the fact that you obviously have to, if you're required to, you obviously have to abide by them. We all know that. But is there more guidance that somebody should be thinking about? I think that's, Shepherd, if I missed something, let me know, but did I miss anything? Thumbs are up. Okay.
Steve, you want to go back to that? And again, CSRD applies to human capital too. I mean, it's a broader set of mandates. So I know my company too, we have EU presence. So it is complicated. How do you sort this out beyond the basic compliance with that, California, the mandates that do persist?
yeah, I think it's where that disclosure and compliance goes.
Okay.
And I think it's in your sustainability report. I don't think it's something that is in your K or your proxy statement, although you certainly can. And I thought Stephen's point on this was outstanding in that, look, if your company believes that, your climate compliance and goals and objectives are beneficial to you, are additive to your long-term value, are, increase your enterprise value, give you a competitive advantage. Well, of course you're going to tout those, and you should, right? Ellen's on a board, where that is, complying with ESG and compliance is a huge competitive advantage. So of course we're going to, tout that. We look forward to, comparing ourselves against our competitors based on those criteria. So again, I think it's, what benefits your company, from a strategic and an enterprise value as to where and how much you tout, your compliance.
And if I can add, I think the question emanates from, there's a lot out there, and I guess there were folks who thought we'd get some collaboration and some convergence of these, and that's what business wants. Business wants a lot of things, but apples to apples, and if we don't have to follow 8 different regimes, we like to follow one. That is also an efficiency, a cost issue. You're not going to get it. Even if the U.S. has a law, it was going to be different from Europe. So you have to have reporting regimes and abilities that are different. That's just where we are. There are some companies who where we will eventually get is that people will get good at it and they'll be able to figure it out, and costs will go down in terms of you have some efficiency here. But right now you just have different regimes and you're going to have different reporting. And like Steve says, different places where you put things, because it matters where you put it, right? You put it in the K, all of a sudden it's filed, which means something under US law. It may not mean the same thing under a European law, but that reason. So it's a little bit complicated. So we don't have we're just not going to get convergence on this. And again, the European societies have it's a different society. They have different ways of thinking about impact and materiality, where and we settled this a while ago, that it will be one type of materiality, which is sort of financial, and not the dual materiality. And maybe we'll get back to having that debate in the U.S., but it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Not in the current new administration.
No.
Gloria,
Yes,
there's a very
Yeah.
interesting question in
Okay.
chat that came in that I don't know if the person's going to see, is Catherine, and it's to Brianna. So Brianna, it's there in chat for you. Emerging growth companies have lower disclosure requirements. Glass Lewis has scored companies low if limited, no specifics on comp and nom-gov, even though companies have good processes in place. Maybe Brianna could spend a few minutes on her perspective for emerging growth companies.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if the no specifics on comp and nom-gov. I'm not sure if that is specifically like around the CD&A or disclosure on board skills and composition and nominating and governance issues, or if it's committee related. But basically for emerging growth companies, it does, I think what they're asking is, the smaller companies. I do have some examples of ones that are smaller. Chegg is one, Recursion. Those are just some off the top of my head proxy statements that for smaller companies that are generally good. We basically take everything on a case-by-case basis. So what I can say is for emerging growth companies, we do often we have our kind of guidelines. We often make exceptions to those guidelines. If things, like I said, it's really about the disclosure, what makes sense for your company. If you're newly established, we see this sometimes where companies don't have a nominating and governance committee for a few years when they're emerging, and those kinds of things. It's just really important to explain. And also we find really helpful when there's some disclosure around engagement with your shareholders. So we don't have I'll take mind share and CEO. Why does that make sense for your company? What have you talked to your shareholders about, and kind of what have they said? Those kinds of things we find really helpful when we're looking at these types of issues.
Brianna, you don't have, just to follow up on that, you don't have the time or the ability to speak directly, obviously, to every company. And so this goes to the ease of finding the information you were just describing. I mean, if you can't see it and you think it's not there because it was hidden somewhere in a footnote, I'm just not sure. Case by case is muddied by the fact that you need to be able to find what is important.
Yes, very true. Yeah.
So Gloria, there's another good one, and I
Good.
apologize for the noise in my background. This is to all the panelists, so you might want to just do the.
There we go.
roll. Can you give your perspective on new and emerging activism tactics? So what are you seeing in terms of activism tactics?
Oh, I
And
love
the
this
person
question.
says, I'm referring to fast-paced public campaigns, utilization of novel online platforms, targeting smaller companies, institutional investor activism, etc. So anyway, it's directed to get the input from
Mainstream media, social media. I mean, it's just public.
Social media,
Incredible.
pushing the,
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So it's a jump ball.
I was going to say, this is where an activist will tell you it's like mud rustling a pig. Whereas with a company and an activist, you're both are going to get dirty, but the pig likes it. Activists like getting dirty. And so if you're going to get dirty, but understand they live for this. They literally, and a lot of folks don't understand how they work. They literally they have people like myself or younger, who are doing analysis. You never know what they're targeting. You don't know that they're targeting you because they're not in your stock yet, right? And they make a case before, and they bring it to management saying, look, we should go after this company XYZ. And they set up the campaign well before they start buying. And they're thinking about newer tactics. There's a tactic being used now by using 14A4, using the proxy to do certain things and having that. They're fairly creative. You got to give them that. Even if you want to hate them, you can hate them, but they're fairly creative. And you got to give them points for creativity. You also have to give them points so that they're using their own money, right? So they're sort of invested in this. But activists just can't win unless they have institutional investors sitting alongside them. And the issue has been, where does the institutional investor go? And it used to be 20 years ago that institutional investors were like, I believe in management and blindly. don't come to me with anything. That's just not the case now. Institutional investors, the BlackRock, State Streets, Vanguards, TIA, Craft, Nuveen, Fidelity, they are listening to both sides and they are willing to vote with the activists when it makes sense. At the end of the day, they're about shareholder value too, right? And they could care less about whether you keep your job as a director. That's not their. I mean, I deal with a lot of directors who I'm like, you're making it personal. They don't care about that. Like I'm telling you, I just do, like they don't care about that. And so the point, and Steve sort of made it about having anti-activism preparedness, which is at least from a procedural standpoint, figuring out whether management is prepared of what happens when they receive a letter. It's actually the chair who receives the letter, and what happens, and having the advisors in place and understanding how they can combat that. And also, quite frankly, is that it's forcing conversations about who's sitting on your board and issues around tenure, whether it's right or wrong. And the easiest thing for an activist to do, I've done it, is look at the directors, pick the ones who have the long tenure, and then have a chart showing stock price and tenure and putting it together, and then putting out a nice 165-page deck, which you do at a conference. And eventually, just like Darden, you might wind up on Darden. Actually, very famously, I showed it for my class in law school. It wound up on HBO. That's one of the shows with because it was sort of a joke about what happened here. And when that happened, you just like you don't want that to happen, right? So it's a brave new world out there.
Well, and the media will lap this stuff up at times. So
they eat it. They loved it. They love it, right?
So Steve, back to chairman of our board, I think he said this last year because he was on this panel. He said, the best activist in the room is the board. Yep. Be the activist. Get way ahead, 6 months out, the year out. Be the one thinking about your vulnerabilities, one by one, including the very vulnerabilities that you just mentioned, Stephen. Mm-hmm. It's, each board member, you've got to have the cohesive picture, Brianna, of the whole board. You've got to have the individuals that are match pieces in the mosaic, but you've also got to have already gone through all of that and obviously have folks, your IR people and outside help who are helping you be that prepared activist yourself. And Steve, you may want to add to that because you were advising clients exactly about how to do this.
Well, that is perfectly said. I wish I could have said it that way, Lori. I totally agree. You should, as a board member, it's your job to be thinking about and asking these questions on your strategy and how you're enhancing value and thinking about areas that activists who are really looking for increased share price are thinking about too. And why aren't you thinking about them as a director? You should never be surprised by issues that are raised by your shareholders. You should be, if you're doing a great job, have thought about that already. And here's our approach and here's our viewpoint. By the way, over the years, I have changed from being a guardian at the gate to more of an embracive type of approach, which over the years I've found to be much more effective. I think that is, quite frankly, the best advice for boards and chairmen. I mean, your first initial reaction as a board or as a management team is to throw up the fence and say they're crazy, they're ridiculous. I'm not even going to entertain that. Call up, your SEC lawyers and figure out ways to put up the barriers to having a conversation or a proxy fight. I don't think that's the right, way to approach it, quite frankly. I think you do have to listen and understand the viewpoint. Not saying you have to agree with it, but you have to understand it and take it into account and show that activist that you've actually, thought about and, considered their viewpoints. You may say it's hokum then that you don't agree with it, but at least you've thought about it, right? You can't go into a shell and give the activist, well, they're just, trying to guard their own, jobs and they put up a wall and they won't even talk to us. Not a good defense.
Brianna, when would Glass Lewis jump in? I mean, we talked about institutional shareholders. I mean, at some point, occasionally Proxy Advisor will join in some way, with an activist.
You mean making a recommendation in support?
Yep.
Yeah, it's all case by case.
Right.
We have a special team that does all of that analysis. But Stephen, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to play your lawyer for a second.
Something else to worry about, I guess. Putting out there.
I'm playing lawyer for Brianna, which is that Glass Lewis didn't join anyway. They they give recommendations. They don't join. They don't work for the activists. They
No,
actually
no,
work for the
no.
institutional investor.
Right, of course.
And they listen to both sides. And so what happens is that they both Glass Lewis and ISS will have the company come in. They'll have the activists come in, and they make a recommendation. It typically depends when it happens. Many times, in a situation, you sort of want as an investor to see your shareholders first before walking in to Glass Lewis and ISS, because then you can talk about what you heard from your investors. Sometimes it happens off and on. But the key point there, Gloria, is that investors are more apt than in the last 20 years to sort of side with the activists than ever before. And you're right about bringing up, you brought about all your universal proxy makes it a little bit easier to compare all the sitting directors and the activists slate, because they're all on one ticket now, right? And you can sort of pick and choose. And many of the proxy advisors will pick and choose and say, we believe in this person, not that person, that sort of thing. So again, these are interesting times, and the environment, and I see in the chat, and Keith Godfrey is absolutely right, talks about the campaign. It's a political campaign. Can you get change? And that message of change is some companies do that well. Some do a very poor job. And by the way, the value proposition may not be there, but the campaign may be there. The political messaging may be there.
So Gloria, apologize, but I think it's time.
Oh. I thought we had another hour or two, Ellen. No.
I know, well, it does bring up the question as to next year, do we do a 2-hour program? But I think
we'll consider
said that
later.
I think we're down to, about 10 to 12 extra people. So I think it's appropriate to.
Well, I'm glad you can see that. That's just awesome. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you all doing this morning and adding the extra time. It's really just invaluable. And you're really fun to do this with. I think I've done this for going way back to.
Way back, Gloria, way back.
Way back.
So I do not know if Beth or I think Melissa's still on, but just again, thank you to the panel. Gloria, Stephen, Brianna,
All
and
of
Keith
you.
from Philadelphia and New England. We can't thank you enough for having done this morning. It was a great panel. I mean, kudos are coming in on the participant thing, but I'm also getting emails through my email system. I'm sure Melissa and others are getting them. And just so thank you very much. And I'm a client of Steve, so it's like I'm partial to Bob.
And I'm a client of pay governance.
The check's
Steve.
in the
There you
mail,
go.
Ellen.
Well, we're also clients
Absolutely.
of pay governance also, and I think we're all clients of Glass Lewis in some way.
And yes, no, of course we are.
And KPMG, of course, is an outstanding firm. So thank you all very much. With that, I'd like to Larissa and Deb, one of you, to close out today. This is being recorded, so that's great. Deb or Larissa, when will this get posted?